The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Now, you're welcome along, Sunday Papers. Great to have you with us. I'll run you through the front pages to kick things off. Sunday Independent. Munster bite back is the headline, so relief for Munster in many ways. Reds heading in right direction at long last is the front page in the Sunday Independent. And beneath that, Jurgen Klopp talking ahead of this afternoon's game against Man City. Pep is the best manager in the world, says Jurgen Klopp. And it was put to him in the press conference ahead of this game that Guardiola still hasn't confirmed if he's signing a contract extension at Man City, and Klopp said he hoped Pep would take a 4-year sabbatical. So back page of the Mail on Sunday, again it's Munster, that's more like it is the headline. So Munster with a bonus point win yesterday. Youngsters show the way as fired up Munster kickstart their season with win over Bulls. And then back page of the Mail as well, Shane McGrath here. So Wexford crackdown as mentors get 96-week bans. So I think this has been coming really. Wexford GA have hit a club mentor with a 96-week ban following an alleged assault on match officials in the week the GA vowed to stamp down on the issue. This was a referee and one of his umpires allegedly assaulted following a junior match last month, and so the maximum ban is 96 weeks. The club involved also fined €1,000. And there was a separate incident in Wexford as well, where a mentor from another club also received a 96-week ban for an alleged assault on a referee, this time following a junior hurling match. And there's going to be apparently Respect the Referee Day across the island next week in GAA. We have Sun then, again looking ahead to Liverpool Man City. Guardiola in title race rap. He says come off at Klopp. So Guardiola saying Klopp might be claiming publicly the Premier League title race is done and dusted. He said Guardiola's response is, well, maybe if there was 10 games to go, but this early in the season he's not quite buying it. We have the Mirror then. It's Guardiola and Pep again, and it's this time Klopp talking about how special Guardiola is, best manager in the world. It's really special what he's doing at Man City. Dutch Courage is the Sunday World, and this is Haaland and Van Dijk again. It's all really coming from the press conferences of the two managers. So Klopp making the point that it's not like it's Van Dijk versus Haaland. He said there will be another centre half on the pitch and Haaland will probably choose that option. He also says if Haaland was alone on the pitch you'd still have to defend him. He's a monster. And then double delight, the Observer. This is England beating Samoa in the Rugby League World Cup, which is underway. 60-0 against, or 60 points to 6 yesterday. That's the front page of the Observer. Very happy to say Reddan O'Brien of the Irish Examiner here in the studio. Great to have you back in. And after much persuasion over what feels like the last 2 years, Eoin Reddan has graced us with his presence. Irish international, over 100 appearances for Wasps and Leinster, of course, won a Premiership title and European Cup with Wasps, more Heineken Cups and Celtic Leagues with Leinster. Sneakily amazing career, actually. It's only when you see it all written down, it's pretty impressive. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for coming in. Lean into that microphone for us if you can. Yeah. Just a touch. The other front page, I must have mislaid it because it was the most interesting front page. Did I give it to you?
No, you did not. No.
Apologies. So the Sunday Times front page, I must have left it outside because I was reading it again. It's an interesting one. We look like a pub team. So this is the FAI, and it's the chairman, Roy Barrett, who has written a letter by email to his fellow board members for what he calls barroom rancour aimed at manager Stephen Kenny, which he says is going down badly with sponsors and the government. So Paul Rowan here with the story. He calls this Roy Barrett letter an extraordinary letter, and it was sent to the board after the win against Armenia, after that 3-2 win. So in this email, Barrett quotes a number of articles in newspapers that have suggested board members, FAI board members, have been briefing journalists, and he says, we look like a pub team. So the Sunday Times have seen this email, which, by the way, the Sunday Times say has caused some antagonism amongst the board members. Some close to the board say they no longer wanted nodding dogs at the top of the association, so that's a dig back at Roy Barrett. But the source points out that there was a recent gathering of football journalists, some politicians and some senior FAI figures. I don't know what the gathering was, obviously some private gathering of some kind. And there were some board members there, some senior members of the executive as well. Nobody is named who was there. But Barrett surprised at the number of leaks coming out of the association since he took the reins nearly 3 years ago. So 4 days after the Armenia game, he sends this email and he says that the Irish Independent today writes that influential FAI figures with reservations about Stephen Kenny are more strident in bar rooms than in boardrooms. He says the Daily Mail reports there is, quote, growing anxiety in the FAI. John Fallon, Irish Examiner, also alluded to growing concerns on the board regarding the performance of the team and Stephen. So what Barrett says is to his board, this is getting tiresome. It reflects poorly on the board. Will those members who believe it's okay to express opinions to journalists on Stephen or any other FAI staff member's performance please desist from doing this? You're letting everybody else on the board down and it's just embarrassing at this point. We look like a pub team. That is really going to go down well with sponsors and governments. Regards, Roy. He signs off the email.
Have a great day.
Yeah, indeed. So that's quite something, isn't it?
It is. And my limited understanding of like corporate governance and stuff like that is that there should be a kind of a cabinet confidentiality that you can have, you know, the strident views within the room, but that, you know, there's collective responsibility and that the decision that comes is a decision that's aired. There should be one person speaking on behalf of the board and all that kind of stuff. So, but this is nothing new in terms of the FAI. I mean, for donkey's years, it's been a leaky sieve with, you know, different people's agendas coming out in different ways. And I can understand Roy Barrett's, you know, just disgust with all this kind of stuff. You can't be having it. And I think the really interesting line in it is that if people are being more strident in bar rooms than boardrooms, you know, why aren't you more strident in the boardroom? Or maybe they just feel that they're not being listened to. But it comes back to at the end of the day that, you know, if the majority of the decision is, if people in power have come to a decision that Stephen Kenny should be given the next European Championships or given the next contract or whatever, you go with that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do them any good to have this kind of stuff coming out in the papers. I mean, this is a Republic of Ireland team, men's team still without a shirt sponsor. You know, they can't be having this.
And the interesting thing for me is actually what's not said. Like how even Roy hasn't mentioned the players, right? Like, or what drips out of a board does to undermine a manager, undermine what he's trying to do. They haven't had like an amazing, you know, string of results that allows them to actually ignore what's been said in the media. Or so any player there who's having any bit of an issue with a teammate or the way they're doing things, these kind of, you know, if people are undermining the coach in the background, it just widens all those cracks and actually makes it very hard, especially with the task they have ahead of them now, right? Obviously with the draw they're after getting. So cleaning that up is key for him actually being able to do his job properly as a manager.
It does, though, hint at a major dysfunction at board level. So the other obvious point to make here is Roy Barrett has written a letter saying, can we please stop with the leaks and stop with the talking? Look what's on the front page of the Sunday Times.
Exactly.
It's like, so that email has gone straight to the Sunday Times.
Exactly. I mean, you just can't be having that. It looks so bad for an organisation. How long down the road are we from the John Delaney era, still trying to get things going in the right direction, trying to get this sponsor, which they so badly need. They need every good PR they can get, and this is going to do nothing. I mean, Jonathan Hill, the new CEO, is coming in for some criticism at the failure to get this major sponsor that they need. He was brought in large part, I believe, for his expertise on that side with the FA back in the years. And you would have to ask, I mean, football in this country is the biggest sporting entity. We see every time they get to a major tournament what can happen. And time is ticking on. This needs to be sorted, and this sort of thing just isn't helping in that way.
No, it sure isn't. Like, it feeds into that general conversation about Stephen Kenny, which, you know, is full of different opinions. There's a spectrum, and obviously that's evident at board level as well. But I mean, when it's fairly obvious he's going to be the man in charge for the European qualification campaign next year, you're obviously better off as a board member to hold your reservations, certainly when you're chatting with journalists, because, you know, it prompts this flurry of reports, and as you said, Eoin, players will pick up on that, and no manager wants to feel like his authority has been undermined at any level, certainly not board level. Absolutely,
yeah. I think you can't get the players, like, they're probably at a time when they really need a united front more than ever, right? For, like, if he's had an up and down set of results, you know, the team are just coming around, there's a bit of positivity building, like, it's a time for unity where every player knows that I need to buy into what Kenny is saying or I'm out, you know. and hopefully they can clean that up. On the one hand, it's a pretty, it's not an easy fix, but it's a really, it's an obvious problem, right? Like you've just pointed out, it's in the press.
Yeah.
To have that size of a problem that you could solve, in some ways is an opportunity, right? If that's there and you can get rid of it, great. But cleaning up a lot of leaks in one go doesn't seem like it's going to be an easy task.
No, well, it's front page news in the Sunday Times. So we'll jump around a bit. I'm going to have to run outside at some stage and find my Sunday Times. I'm not sure where it is. Arthur out there, I think, is having a look for it, hopefully. So the Mail on Sunday, there's an interview here which I think caught everybody. It's probably the best interview in the pages this morning by a bit of a distance.
Yeah.
So it's Dylan Hartley. So he's pictured there in Dubai, and the big headline is, "I get dizzy spells, drop things, stutter, but I can't spend all my time thinking I've got dementia at 36. So it's not ostensibly just an interview about dementia or any potential issues from playing the game. It's about his new life now, and he's kind of fascinating on that. So it's Nick Simon who's in Dubai. So Dylan Hartley has now moved to Dubai with his family, and they meet for morning coffee in the 37-degree heat. Smart casual ahead of an afternoon of client meetings. We don't at this stage in the piece know what the client meetings are. Dylan Hartley almost blends in. He is slimmer now with an expensive new hairline. It's a hell of a line just to drop in, isn't it? Dylan Hartley reading this going, what?
Did you have to?
Only his noticeable limp as he drags his right leg sets him apart from the stylish clientele as they glide between the exotic fruits and the Arabian buffet. And then you've straight talking Hartley. My hip is effed, he says, taking a seat, ordering a black Americano. I've got arthritis, so I'm getting a replacement. It's pretty debilitating. I can't walk properly. I don't sleep well. Can't tie my shoelaces. Struggle to play with my kids. Struggle to sit in the toilet. Not that you need to hear about that at breakfast, he starts. So I think right away you know that Hartley's going to be straight talking, entertaining, and he continues on in that vein. He politely declines the food, says the piece. These days Hartley only eats between the hours of midday and 6 p.m. He's opting for a healthier lifestyle. Pub lunches in rural North Hampshire are a thing of the past. So he says, 7 weeks since we moved out here, me, my wife, our 2 kids, we wanted change. We wanted to get out of our comfort zone in Northampton. And so he says, business-wise, I jumped. I thought this was interesting before I was pushed. He says, how I was working in the UK was almost like a dirty drug. Do a bit of corporate, bit of media. It was always there. There was enough to keep you going and it was easy, but for me it wasn't a sustainable career choice. I enjoy doing a bit, but it's just a hobby now to stay connected with rugby and earn at the same time. I needed to take on the real world, and that led me here working for Access Hire. So he's working for that company. It's like construction and oil and gas. And he also does some coaching for them as well. He coaches rugby teams on Tuesday and Thursday, so it's kind of best of both worlds for him. And so he says, talks of retirement, been very difficult. He retired, second child, lockdown started, renovating my house, paying builders' bills. My salary just stopped. I had a payout agreed and signed with Northampton, but because of COVID, they said they couldn't pay it. So we settled on 50% of what we'd agreed. I had no income and I was like every other self-employed person at home during the pandemic. And he made, I think, a very self-aware point as well. He refers to his post-rugby life as a dirty drug again. I wanted to get away from that dirty drug, cut ties from rugby in a way, and not get stuck in that downward cycle of being an irrelevant sportsman. Let's be honest, unless you're Martin Johnson or Johnny Wilkinson, you have a couple of years and then your value drops. When Jamie George retires and they need a hooker for TV, I'm not the guy they'll be calling. I suspect there's a lot of former rugby players who would read those kind of lines and think, yeah, I mean, I've had similar thoughts myself.
Yeah, and I think, the like, first of all, I've played against him and met him lots of times, and this to see him this honest is great. Okay, I hadn't had that experience with him before, and maybe just because I hadn't spent enough time with him, but I just the honesty is great. But also, he's a former England captain, right? So to say this is post, or this is what a retirement looks like, is even generous, right? Because he's had media opportunities in corporates that are, far above what most players retiring will have. But it's still really challenging. I mean, that's clear how honest he is and how tough it's been for him. And I think it's one of the best pieces I've read, or that's explained probably the conversations I'd have with people on a one-on-one, who've retired. It probably just sums it up really, really well. There's no rubbish in it. It's just dead straight. It's as it is. And he captures he really captures the piece around, you know, how much media should you do when you finish. Like, it's really interesting, right? How, like, you know, are you actually, you know, how long will it actually keep you happy for? Is it helping you? Is it actually helping you transition? Is it hurting your transition? It's interesting to read. I thought it was very, very honest and a great point.
Because he said he had just enough to keep going, enough corporate work, enough media to sort of keep his hand in. But as he said himself, I'm just waiting for the next high-profile hooker or England captain to retire, and then suddenly I'm yesterday's man. And I would think a lot of players who get their initial burst of punditry and then slowly, they either do very well, but there's a sink or swim quality, and the name recognition and the recency only gets them so far.
And it's interesting as well, because like you say, Eoin, he's the former England captain.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And if he's looking at it in that stark terms, and you're thinking, what's it like further down the pyramid? And what I thought of when I was reading it was, hasn't Gary Neville spoken in the past about how his shelf life is going to be? Now, not because he thinks it's a shelf life, but because he just thinks recency is another issue as well. I mean, how relevant can he be 10 years after retiring, or 15? He says, there will come a point when I will walk away from it. Now, I haven't heard him say that recently, so maybe he still loves it, but there is that point. You know, the further you get away from the game, I think Brian O'Driscoll has spoken about as well, that you have to keep talking to people in the game, and you know what's happening in training, what are the big trends in the game, stuff like that. So you know, it is difficult. And your point, Owen, is very interesting. Does that actually help or hinder you when you finish the game? You know, it's basically, is it cold turkey, or is it would cold turkey be better for you, or do you kind of ease yourself out of it? And I suppose that's different for everybody, really, isn't it?
It is, and the things that jump up and down in front of you, like that are attracting you, are all going to be stuff you can do now. So it will be media, TV. It will be rugby, right? It won't be, you know, Dubai, right? It won't be a access list in Dubai, which he's obviously had to dig for. He's had to think about it, and he's had to try and find his way into something else, which, you know, if he hadn't been England captain, would have probably had to face up that earlier, because he wouldn't have survived, right, without the corporates and the TV. But I thought it was a very good article, and you know, he does get into the concussion side of it as well. You know,
I would have gladly read the whole article about him after rugby, and prefer to have read part 2, Dylan Hartley and concussion, next week. That's how good the first third of it is. It's a brilliant read, and the second third of it is brilliant as well.
It is, yeah. We'll come to that in a second. And I presume your sense of talking to players one-on-one on is that they're acutely aware that there'll be an initial burst of offers when they first retire, and then it'll go very, very quiet. Or do they almost think, oh well, maybe this is just what post life is going to be?
It's like the kind of the you know, the affirmation or the positivity will come from these opportunities. You know, like it'll be media driven, it'll be corporate driven. So you won't be told you're great at your new job, right? Because you're not great at your new job. So that's going to take a long time of work and toil, like you had to do at the start of the rugby. But the easy win is people. So people don't notice it. Would be what I'd say. I don't think they do. They're aware of it. But I'd say, having been out of the game, you know, I used to say, maybe 60-70% for. At this stage, I would say I haven't met a single player who has retired who hasn't found it challenging.
Yeah, of course.
And that goes from captains of Ireland, captains of England in the paper today, to people who had to retire at 21 with you know, a sudden injury.
Yes.
You know.
You went straight into the business world, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
And was that the plan for quite some time before retirement?
It was on the cards, yeah. And the last year was you know, kind of will I, won't I? Like I had another year to go almost. Like there was another year I could have played on.
Right.
Which meant the leaving bit was like, you know, I didn't, instead of thinking, oh, someone's let me go, I had a distinct feeling of, have I let somebody down, right? Because I decided in June to not play in September. So like that does give you a different feeling when you're finishing, because you've a compassionate feeling as opposed to thinking you're someone's after doing a job on you. You know what I mean? But then, you know, I think it's been for me. There's a different phases. Like I probably had in what I was trying to do. I felt so far, kind of. It felt like such another mountain to climb, as in how difficult it was going to be. It gave me a similar actual motivation that I had with the rugby, right? You know what I mean? And as I do that longer and longer now, like that's interesting how the rest of my life fits into a week now, right? Like you can't always be around winning, you know, as it was European Cup, or you know. So it's I think I'm in another phase now than I hadn't been for the first few years.
So he goes on to talk about the issue I suppose most rugby players of his age are concerned about. And he says, I mean, it's quite interesting, his approach to his health now. So he said, I'm 90% fine when it comes to concussion or potential dementia. He said, I'm 90% fine, but there are a few 1%ers that keep me in check. A little bit of dizziness and the odd stutter and dropping things. So he says, part of this journey of moving to Dubai is to get a new lease of life, to get sun on my face, wake up warm so my joints aren't creaking. I want to lose some wrinkles so my daughter stops saying I look so old. It wasn't right for me and my family to join the group action, because he was asked to join the group action. And his rationale was, I don't want to be in that headspace, no pun intended, of negativity, in effect. He said, I don't want to spend your whole day talking and thinking about deteriorating or forgetting your kids' names, etc. How's that going to make you feel? Instead, I sat down with my wife. I said, what can we do to get ahead of what's around the corner? Research says eat well, drink less, train more, enjoy time with kids, get more oxygen to the brain, get your financial house in order so you can sleep well at night, have a daily purpose. I'd rather do that and approach things positively than sit around waiting and worrying. As soon as I put it out of sight and out of mind, the world opened up again. I gave myself a schedule, even if it was getting out of the house one day a week to play golf. I removed the negativity of worrying about dementia, and I feel better for it. Those guys that they have to do their thing, he said. Those guys have got to do their thing. Good on them, and I support them, and I support what they're doing from afar, but I need to find my own way. And interestingly, though, he has gone to a clinic out in Dubai, and they treat traumatic brain injuries. He has booked himself in for an assessment which included multiple scans and tests, and now he's going to have a 3-month treatment therapy which will get oxygen to the brain. So he's going to spend hours in a pressurised chamber to see if it will combat the impacts of his rugby career. And he says, I'm doing my rehab, so I'm in the best possible place in 10 years. Because I don't know if you saw that Steve Thompson documentary the other week, but certainly they didn't go into detail on it, but one of the cutaways while he was just talking, generally being interviewed over it, was him with like an oxygen mask on in his house, and was obviously, so one of the treatments seems to be getting oxygen to the brain. So Dylan Hartley is doing something similar, and that's me speculating a touch, but it sounds similar to what we saw Steve Thompson doing. And he does say with the brain scans, it would be nice to have something to compare it with, like when I was 18 versus now. But he's going to do this therapy program, get oxygen to the brain, and he said, come back to me in a few months if you want, and we'll do an interview, and we'll see if there's results. But look, he tells the same war stories. 2011, I smashed into Keane Healy's knee in the Heineken Cup final. I had a massive lump on my head. We went in at half time with one hand on the trophy. Then I went into the toilets and this weird thing came over me. I just started crying, breaking down. That, along with the massive lump on my forehead, was a clear sign of a knock. I played the second half. I can't remember it. That's your era. Quite literally.
Yeah, and the start, and there's another line which goes on about older hookers headbutting him as he I mean, which I remember that happening, and you're just thinking, God, thank God I don't play in that position at the time. I mean,
this was before they engage in the scrum.
Yeah.
If people didn't read it, he said the other hooker, who didn't name him, would make eye contact with him and headbutt him.
Yeah.
But Hartley says, well, it scared the holy shit out of me. So when I got to elder statesmen, I started doing it to young lads too. So like this vicious cycle. Obviously, they don't engage in the same way now.
Yeah. Look, it's scary, right? And there's a lot to go here still, right, in terms of what's going to come out of it, and how much safer we can make the sport. There has been a lot of progress made. I mean, things like that just wouldn't, obviously, I mean, like, even the thought, even how crazy that feels now, like you wonder 5 years from now, when you look back at now, what will be the headbutt in the scrum moment. But the game has to get safer all the time, or there won't be enough people playing it, right? He mentions the gladiatorial element to it, and he's right, okay? People do love that, but you just won't have the numbers playing, rightly so, if the game doesn't continue to get safer as we go on.
It's very interesting as well that he's talking about what can be done to help players, and this marries both parts of the article, the retirement aspect and the concussion, and how players are physically after it. And he's talking about creating a fund for retired players, which seems like a very simple thing to do. Make every player contribute 1% from the day they sign their first contract, and it all goes into a big pot. And off the top of my head, I would say there's definitely a fund like that in the GA. I think I'm aware of.
Right.
I'm sure soccer would have them. I'm kind of shocked that, but that clearly wasn't there in your day playing for Wasps even. But it seems like a very simple thing
It does.
to do.
And he mentioned another one there where, like, you know, when you finish at a club,
Yeah.
open up the physio once a week. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I mean, that would be a great thing,
Yeah.
right? It really would. He does, and he's had some good ideas, to be fair to him.
He does, doesn't he?
Yeah, he has. Yeah. So there's loads of small things like that can be done.
Because he says as well, and this came up in the Steve Thompson documentary, he's talking about brain scans. So he said if you injure your knee and you're a marquee player international, they'll send you straight away for an MRI because cost, he said, is the reason why every player isn't getting a head scan. That's an easy first step. And one of the conversations Steve Thompson was having with a couple of his former teammates in the documentary was like the cost of brain scans is so exorbitant that clubs are a little bit going on the cheap on this, and maybe not everyone who could have done one was getting one at all times.
It's also as well, I think you guys had Dr. Michael Collins in there, didn't you? I went to that UPMC concussion conference in UCD at the time.
Yeah.
And there was myself and a couple of the other print lads there, and I wouldn't be overly, au fait with it, but I have covered it off and on down the years.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff he was saying at that conference just took me absolutely by surprise. And because you made me think of it there, because he's talking about the MRI and an injury, and Dr. Collins was saying, like, all our traditional thinking about concussion was go into a dark room, pull the curtains, don't do anything. He says, hold on, every other injury you have to rehab it. You have to stress test it a little bit. And he's saying that's what we're doing with the brain now. And it just made me think, I went to their first conference in Dublin in 2016, and the change in what they were saying then and now, and he gave us a great line at one stage. He said, we started this in 2009 or whatever, and he said, I would hate to see a tape of what we were saying in 2009.
Yes.
So it just shows the stratospheric graph in what they're doing. And 2009 is like you were at the height of your career, it's not that long ago either. But all these ideas are very good that he's talking about.
He's out in Pittsburgh, and he's a world-renowned expert and treats thousands of people a year. And he was, because all we've had is doom and gloom on this issue.
Yeah.
And if you want to watch it on YouTube, or any former players listening, he would give you a real sense of optimism that this is very treatable.
Okay.
Now look, when it gets in, I asked him, what about the world when dementia starts? No one's treating that very well. He said, look, that's trickier, but just those concussion symptoms.
Even something like the second one can be less serious if the first one is treated properly.
Yeah.
Which, like you say, is such a huge kind of, you kind of can breathe a little bit of relief. It's some potentially good news in this situation, so it's.
It was an interesting one, and I don't know, it'd be interesting to watch. I'm going to watch it going forward, but Peter O'Reilly, it's actually a different type of story. He's talking about James Cronin.
Yeah.
But he's covering the fact that we were stuck for a loosehead cover in New Zealand.
Yeah.
But he refers to a brain injury. So he says, who was it that was missing from that test?
Jeremy Lockman.
Yeah, because he suffered from a brain injury. And I thought, I have never, normally that's HIA, concussion, and when I read it, it jumped out at me. I was thinking, that's actually a very good way of reporting this. It does sound a lot more serious.
It cuts through it, doesn't it?
It does cut through it, and it brings, like you mentioned it there, even about scans, it brings the same ideas around, hamstring injury, knee injury, they're scans, straight away, every time.
Yeah.
But I found that quite jarring to read, this guy's coming back after a brain injury, which is what he was doing, right?
Yeah.
But
Brain damage is right next door to it, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hartley to play against. He's mouthy and
oh yeah, I mean,
rub lads up the wrong way.
He's he's clearly well educated, well read, smart guy. But when he played, he likes you to think he was probably the opposite, right? He got in a lot of trouble. I played against them for Was. I think he gouged 2 players in the same game and was banned for 22 weeks or nearly a full season. Yeah, right. He was a tough cookie to play against, Jim.
And even his persona, he says, I was Eddie Jones's messenger. Looking back, maybe I would have done things a bit differently, smiled a bit more. It's liberating to be myself now and be honest, start fresh.
And he wasn't he? He was pretty honest the whole way through that interview there, It was
great interview.
Yeah, very good. On James Cronin, just to briefly mention it, Peter O'Reilly's talking to him, and I guess they're talking about this mysterious departure from Munster. People would wonder, well, why is he gone? Because he just turned 30, and obviously he played a couple of times for Ireland under Joe Schmidt, and 140 odd Munster caps at loose head. And as we mentioned there, as Eoin mentioned, in New Zealand we were pretty desperate for a loose head, to the extent that Michael Bent was poached out of semi-retirement to play against New Zealand. So it seems really it was just down to money. That's the reason Cronin went. And Peter O'Reilly says, bewilderingly, a cash-strapped club, which is Munster, has a reputation in the industry for overpaying their players. So Cronin was on a big salary. He was still rated highly enough to play 17 games that final season. When the club announced his departure, Johan van Graan said, this is unfortunately the unfortunate side of professional sport. And it seemed, there, according to Cronin, there was an offer on the table for quite a long time. And then, right approaching the deadline on March 31st, that offer was revoked. And he says, through my agent, I did say I was willing to take a pay cut, but there was no offer. So Munster let him go, in effect. So he's now over playing for Leicester. And interestingly, he's making his 6th start in a row. Again, it's funny with rugby, everything's so interconnected. Like, if we were just having a concussion conversation, we'd be looking at the Premiership and people would be saying, well, there are too many games. Like Willie Stewart, the guy behind the study in Glasgow about the likelihood of former players being 15 times more likely to get motor neuron disease. He's saying you got to play less games, but you park that and then you're onto the Cronin piece, and he's like, my 6th start in a row, it's great, you know. And you obviously were on that Premiership treadmill, so you know what it's like. But he's enjoying it. I mean, 6 games in is different to 50 games in. We'll see how he's feeling then. But like that'll be his lot now. He won't be rested as often. Yeah.
No, it's a big like look, he's taking the opportunity both sides. Like he did a year in, I think, Biarritz as well, right? So he's certainly had to kind of, you know, dust himself off at 30 and kind of keep the dream alive and chase something. So fair play to him, right? I think this sport happens, right? Like this kind of thing can happen, and that the reason he's left could be anything from poor communication all the way up to, you know, Graham Rowntree being a very savvy scrum coach and knowing what he has there, he can get certain value out of it, and deciding to you know, spend their money elsewhere, you know, or Johan van Graan making a bad call before he left. It could be a million reasons, but he's doing really well, and you know, it's an interesting, you know, Munster is like the Premiership is, you know, it's a bit more like European Cup every week, you know. They've done a very good job. Even it's funny, the marketing of it, even with the, you know, the clubs going bankrupt over there, like the games that are on or whatever still have a good intensity, but the players aren't as good. Like there's far more internationals playing in the URC than there is in the Premiership. But I saw him playing last week. He's had a great few weeks, and it's good news for Ireland, right? One way or another. You know, we can't fly Michael Bent over when we're stuck, right? So Jeremy Loughnan had a good game last night as well. So I suppose that's a good example of 2 loose heads playing instead of 1, right? So it does work sometimes, and it's good for him.
Just one other rugby piece. By the way, Eoin Reddan hasn't insisted we only talk about rugby in this paper slot. We are going to move off it in just one moment. But curious for your thoughts. Again, it links in with everything we've just been talking about. So Neil Francis is talking about rugby getting serious about dangerous tackles, and he says, he quotes how 28 states in America have the habitual offender laws. It's an anti-violence strategy, so 3 strikes and you're done in a big way. He said rugby needs a 3 red cards and you're gone policy, plus €500,000 fines for headhunters, as he calls them, a headhunter being in the tackle. So like he mentions several examples here. He says last week the Sharks centre Rowan Jans van Ransburg, he got a red for dangerous high tackle on Ross Byrne, 2nd tackle in as many minutes. What exactly was he trying to do? Who thinks that his tackle was clumsy or reckless? Would anyone like to bid me and it wasn't intentional? He says, given the potential for serious and life-changing injury, that's just no longer relevant. So intentional or not, no longer relevant. And he mentions Van Rensburg, Sale Sharks player, given a red card for a dangerous high tackle on Harvey Skinner a few years back, got 3 weeks, was back in 2 after attending the World Rugby Coaching Intervention Programme tackling school. Prior to that, 2019, he received another red card in a dangerous situation with Springbok scrum half. That was on the back of another red card he received in 2017 in South Africa. And Neil Francis mentions other repeat offenders, talks about Bundiaki's red card, which is his 3rd since he got his 1st in 2019. He said, the question has to be asked, if it's not intentional, how come the same guys are committing the same dangerous plays to the same part of the body? And he goes on to talk about really We have to think about fines, say 10,000 for the first red card for a head-high tackle, then 250,000 for a second, 500,000 and a year ban for the third. And he mentions as well, I'm sure you've noticed this, Eoin, or maybe it's been talked about in the dressing room, I don't know. He says, 1 week these players take someone's head off, 3 weeks later they're back on the pitch doing it again. The sanction, it always seems, is the bare minimum. He says another aspect of foul play is that distinctly unpalatable one whereby there's the handshake after the event or as the perpetrator's walking off the field. In so many instances, the whole thing is a sham. The advice to the player always appears to be to instruct him to shake hands and inquire as to the victim's health. Is this done in the fellowship of the game or in good grace, or is it done because if they apologise immediately it's seen as mitigation and their sentence is reduced? There is no remorse or regret. It's done purely to shorten the length of the sentence. The victim always seems to shake his attacker's hand, whether he's aware of why it's been proffered or not. He says if World Rugby is serious, which they are not, they should have a 3 red cards and you're gone policy and issue big fines to the headhunters. So that's the gist of his article. Agree, disagree?
I agree. I whatever about the scale, I think,
500, make it $1 million.
People getting
the scale is a bit worrying, isn't it?
people getting paid are like while they're after red cards, where they've really trying to hurt someone or even recklessly.
He talks about they're on full pay.
Yeah,
when they're
like that was the line that probably got me across the line in terms of the article. I was thinking that doesn't really make much sense. And you're relying on like you are trying to penalise teams anyway, right? You're saying, without this guy, you won't be able to win as many games, and then you're hoping that the culture of the team will make sure that person doesn't do it again. But I think, fines are not being paid, or I think there's definitely something in that. Like it's also another step making the game safer, which is what everyone's trying to do anyway.
Yeah.
And I totally get the bit about shaking hands. Whether the motivation is real or not. If the motivation, like 60 seconds before, was to take your head off, you shouldn't really have to shake that person's hand.
Yeah.
It is spoken about, right? It's you can get you out of jail, but I don't think the person receiving the handshake is really saying everything's fine either.
Yes. So Neil Francis makes the point that intent here is now irrelevant because the damage ultimately done is the same. But as somebody who's like immersed in it and can have a great sense of just how in control rugby players are or aren't on a pitch, can you tell which ones are intentional? Are they largely intentional?
You can definitely, like you watch a World Cup final, and there'll be 7 penalties given by both teams. 7. And that's why they'll be there, because they've managed to go from 25, when they were playing in the autumn, and they're down to 7 each, and there'll be no quarter given, and the intensity will be massive, and there'll be no cards, because people can control their behaviours when it matters.
Okay. Therein is the answer.
And they're the best.
Yeah.
They're the best team. So it's the coaches that create the best environments, the best cultures, that people know the implications if they get yellow card or red card, give penalties away. They won't be playing the next week. So it's basically, I think what Neil Francis is actually saying is, let's not trust coaches and cultures to drive these standards. Let's actually, put them right through. So every group, is driven to this. But I think player behaviour is absolutely, when you look at the best teams winning the trophies, it's all very, very controlled stuff from start to finish.
Okay.
Yeah, the scale of it, obviously, I mean, when he says go from €10,000 for the first red to 250, that's like when you go through the M50 and forget to pay your toll.
You'll also bankrupt
20 quid for
99% of the players.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of, hold on, where's the sense of perspective here? Like, and I know I'm being a bit flippant about it. But the whole 3 strikes and you're out thing as well, just to take that analogy, I mean, if you get 3 driving tickets, is that it? Are you done for life? I mean, and intent comes into this as well, like you've spoken about, Eoin, as well. Like, proving intent is, in any court of law or any sort of situation like that, it's next to impossible, and that's when you get into the grey areas of filtering stuff out.
And the burden of proof is tricky, but like, if the same fella is coming to you a third time going, I didn't mean that one either.
I think, and that's a good point, and I do take that, and I think one of the really frustrating things with rugby's disciplinary system is that you will read a guy gets X amount of weeks, but he gets 2 weeks off for contrition, which the joke is he went in and said he's sorry and he bent his head like a naughty schoolboy.
But those hearings are bizarre.
But this is the point. And then at the end of it, he says they can follow football's yellow card system or else take it seriously. And that's, I think, that's very end of the article. That's a good thing. You know, you're building up 1 suspension, 2 suspension. Now, there is an element of that in rugby's disciplinary rules, but it's not quite that simple. And that's a very simple way of doing it. If you have 3 red cards or 2 red cards in a season or over a period of 12 months,
Get a year.
That's
he said, give me a year for...
Yeah.
That'd make anyone stop and think.
Yeah, so there are elements in it which I agree, but the very, very punishing nature of, you know, the scale of fines and the 3 strikes and you're out is a little bit too heavy-handed for me.
Maybe. Those hearings seem to take bizarre things into account.
Yeah.
Like, you're practically saying, come here, he helps old ladies cross the street and kisses babies. Like, you can't ban him for 6 weeks. It has to be 3.
Yeah, not that type of player.
Yeah. What's the longest ban you were on the receiving end?
Oh, I don't think I never got a red card.
Oh, did you? Yeah, okay, there you go.
Yeah. 2 yellows.
2 yellows. In how many years?
About 15, yeah.
It's not bad.
Both for shouting at a ref, I think.
Okay, fair enough.
The ultimate sin.
Yeah, exactly. So, quite the week for the Republic of Ireland. Numerous pieces obviously reflecting on World Cup qualification and the Up for the Ra controversy. We have David Kelly, for instance, in the Sunday Independent, does a great piece really charting that journey from the 2017 strike threat through to where they are now, and he talks to various people involved and hears from them, like Stuart Gilhooly, who was external solicitor for the PFAI, and Stephen McGuinness, the PFAI General Secretary, who, you know, was a big part of that period in 2017. And just to jog your memory, this had been coming for a few years, and then it finally boiled over in advance of a game against Slovakia, and they gave the now famous press conference at SIP2 headquarters, Liberty Hall, April 4th, and that made international headlines. One quote from Anya O'Gorman struck a chord: "We've been getting changed in public toilets on the way to matches." And David Kelly makes the point, it's easy to overlook the fact now that in the famous photograph outside Liberty Hall of the Irish players wearing Respect jerseys, there were only 14 present. Others were either too afraid or too uncertain to show up. And we spoke to Emma Byrne, who you can see there front and centre of that picture, and she really brought the whole thing together. We had her at a road show at Vicar Street a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying she was getting phone calls from younger players or the parents of younger players who were being told, you turn up to this thing, that might be the end, you know, it mightn't be so good, your prospects of playing for Ireland mightn't be so good, you know.
Yeah.
So there were all sorts of shenanigans going on in the background, and look, fast forward 5 years, it's been an incredible state of progress when they were just given decent standards, full-time coaching, even the match day fee, which again, as is pointed out in this piece, is not about making money, it's just about not being grossly out of pocket. It's amazing how quick the upturn has been in their fortunes.
It's great, and even you touched on that of the phone calls that Emma Byrne said people were getting at the time. I didn't know that a couple of players had actually turned up at a training session. Dave mentions it in the piece, so they were sufficiently cowed, you know, to kind of, while their teammates were doing this at Liberty Hall, they were turning up at the training session.
Right.
You know, so you can imagine, just from a human point of view, the horrible situation that people were put in. You can imagine the phone calls, the hand-wringing, the worry and the stress. And I think, you know, it's funny because this whole Liberty Hall experience has been touched on time and time again, and especially in recent weeks. And I was kind of surprised to see it in the paper today, given everything that's happened. But I think it's a great idea, and I think Dave has started it brilliantly with an extract from a letter to Ireland's international women's team by Ruth Doctor, who was the FAI's high performance director at the time. And I think it's worth just reading that little bit. And in it he says, "We would urge you to consider seriously, both individually and as a group, how your proposed actions could damage your club career, your international reputation as players, and your responsibilities to the many young people who look up to you as role models. Your current stance of making this into an issue about PFAI representation and the threat of making this a public issue will not yield any positive results, but will, in all likelihood, damage women's football and its future development." I mean, geez, you read that now 5 years down the line and put yourself in the shoes of those players.
Well, if
who
I
got
was
that.
in my early 20s and read that from Ruth Doctor, I would think,
I can't.
We can't do this.
No.
It's too big,
Absolutely.
too scary. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you there's a bit of you'll think they're trying to scare me, but there's a bit of you that'll say this this person's a performance director. You know, they know.
Yes.
You know, and you start to question, will I actually help? So even the ones who are brave enough have to have the clarity of knowledge to know that actually he's wrong. You know what I mean? We're going to actually do this and it's going to work.
Yeah.
And it's funny in teams, you know, throughout the week, the interviews after the game, the match, it's kind of like, you know, I wasn't up to speed with this 2017 incident as much, but to see that this happened is almost not surprising given the kind of people that we've been listening to all week. You know what I mean? It's almost like
Proper substance.
yes, and there's such a respect between, you know, the captain then, Emma Byrne, the players now. It's just they barely talk without ever referencing what's gone before them, you know, what they're going on to next. And you watch, you know, through all the other stuff we spoke about this morning, that's not that common, actually. You know, teams often talk about themselves, they talk about what they've done, their own coach right now, their teammates right now. But to see the breadth of and the kind of respect over multiple campaigns, different coaches, different captains, different players, you know, it was amazing all week, I think. You know, and I think it shows they are a special group of people.
It was overshadowed, obviously, in some respects by the singing afterwards. So that's addressed in other pieces. Shane McGrath, for instance, in the Mail on Sunday, their chief sports writer, he said, kindness and understanding informed public reaction to the playlist misstep by the Irish women's team. He said, fair play. Now let's be willing to extend them to less sympathetic public transgressions in Irish sport. So basically, he's talking here about the fact that the general goodwill towards them definitely cushioned the fallout from what happened in Hampden Park on Tuesday night. The decision to sing the song was wrong, despite the misspelt insistences of many tricolour festoon Twitter accounts. He said, a failure to appreciate why singing a song that includes a line praising the IRA is in part attributable to boneheaded republicanism, but is to a large extent due to the passing of time. He says, we are regularly told in analyses of the rise of Sinn Féin, there is a new generation now in their 20s and 30s for whom the troubles in the North are ancient history. It doesn't make the IRA any more palatable to civilised people, though, nor does it elevate the creative works of those tuneless mastodons, the wolf tones. He says, Pow's side are the nation's darlings, and with good reason. They're so impressive as sports stars and as people that nobody doubts they'll shake off the lingering effects of this unfortunate episode. They are public figures who are easy to admire and support, and therefore easy to forgive as well. This week's situation, it was conditioned by two factors: the popularity of the team and the nature of the transgression. The latter point is worth reiterating, given the unsettling revisionism that means songs about the IRA are now deemed harmless. And I thought Paul Rowan had just a really interesting intro. I didn't know where it was going at first, and it kind of crystallised why people maybe had issue with the singing of the song. He said, in Vincent Brown's long defunct McGill magazine, the distinguished rugby writer John Reason used to write in compelling and glowing terms about the back row combination of Nigel Carr, Brian Spillane and Philip Matthews, which propelled Ireland to the 1985 Five Nations Championship. The Ireland back three of FAI, Diane Caldwell and Louise Quinn could easily be mentioned in the same sentence after their imperious performance in the 1-0 defeat of Scotland. And then he goes on to say that Carr's career was ended by injury sustained in a 500-pound IRA bomb explosion on his way to training for the first ever Rugby World Cup in 1987, which killed a judge and his wife, shouldn't go unmentioned. But more on matters related to that subject later on. And then he talks at length about Fahy and Caldwell and Quinn. But there's another piece, women's IRA songs were offensive, but the remorse is sincere. That's Paul Rowan again. What did you make of it all, Brendan? Then you were watching on, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was watching on, yeah. I was interested by the manner in which it's been dealt with by the papers and today as well, and the nature of what we do here before we come on air is we're skimming through a lot of stuff. So I wouldn't say this for definite, but I did not see a reference to the Up the Ra chant in the Sunday Indo sports section. I haven't seen the main section. Maybe it's dealt with in there, I don't know. But I thought that was very interesting, because you look at the Sunday Indo, and we mentioned Dave Kelly's piece in Liberty Hall. That's kind of the main piece. They have one on Katie McCabe's home turf to be turned into a wetland because of a decision by the local council. and we have a piece kind of on Amber Barrett and going into various aspects of the upside of it as well. So Desindo hasn't dwelt on it at all, maybe of the belief this is done, it's been dealt with, it's time to move on. The other papers have taken a different approach on it, and Paul's approach on it, I think, works very well in the Sunday Times. One piece is the world in their hands, this is the good story, this is about that brilliant defensive trio and what they've done, and then on the far side it deals exclusively with the IRA song. And I was thinking of this during the week. I think regardless of what happens with this story from now on, the fact of the matter is it will go into abeyance for a number of months. But when this team goes out to Australia and New Zealand next year, you're going to have a local reporter or somebody from whatever researching the team that comes to their town, whether it's Wellington or Adelaide or whatever. This is going to be put up in front of them again. So I think, unfortunately, this is going to run and run and run, and it will come back to them down the line, and that's just a point of their story now. And you talked about how great their story is, Owen, and it is. This is now part of it, and they have to own it, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over a period of time, because it is part of it, and it will be brought up to a player sitting in a press conference with a bank of cameras in front of them.
Yeah, probably.
So that's going to happen. But I thought that the manner in which Vera Pauw, the manager, dealt with it on Wednesday was, I think, I've always been seriously impressed with her in terms of the tone she takes on various matters, football and non-related matters. There's no fluff. There is no kind of deflection. There's no whataboutery. She came out and she said, this is wrong. I wasn't aware of it as a foreigner. I didn't realise it, but it was wrong. It shouldn't have happened. And I think that's the bottom line of all of it. It is wrong. It shouldn't have happened. And then it's which road you want to take down from there.
It's interesting. I think Vera Pauw did the team such a service. Like, she was eloquent beyond belief, because it's funny, Shane McGrath makes a very reasonable point, and it's an interesting observation. He's saying this team are so bloody well liked that forgiveness was forthcoming. Yeah. But he says, he was saying, like, what about less sympathetic figures? Will they get the same response? And he was citing the Gordon Elliott story when people didn't want forgiveness at all and wanted his career over, which I think is a fair one to raise. But I guess one of the key differences in Gordon Elliott versus this situation is that I remember, because I was in here and I was livid with the initial statement because it said, "Oh, you misunderstand the picture." Yeah, I was on a phone call and I sat on the horse accidentally. I forgot I was on. Whereas Vera Pauw came out and said, one, the issue is not that the video was leaked. The issue is it happened. Yeah. And two, it wouldn't have been all right if the video wasn't leaked either. And three, they weren't singing Up the Pause or whatever initial nonsense was going out on Tuesday night. They were singing that. We did do it, and it's not acceptable. Like, the apology was almost so complete that even like if you had your pitchfork ready at the end of her apology, you'd be like, okay, you sort of disarmed me almost on every front there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think, like, my general reading the papers this morning, it was very forgiving, but I would actually not give that credit to the media. Actually, I agree with you. I think the way they've dealt with it, so they've just qualified, had a massive high, and now there's, like, through their own making, an instant challenge, the unexpected, unplanned for, and we all know a lot more about them now than we did before this challenge came up, right? Including Vera Pauw, who I thought was amazing as well. But they all just seem to have the same sort of values, or they seem very connected in how they've dealt with the issue all week. And I think when it does come up a year from now in New Zealand, I would have full faith that they'll probably deal very well with it, like they did this week.
It's been quite interesting, and this is where we'll veer into non-sporting territory, where we're probably, I would feel we've less expertise or less of a right to kind of hold forth in an environment like this. But I would say, more than any recent example I can think of, this whole situation has prompted, like, this wider debate about, well, what does up the ra even mean for different generations? Like, where does this sit with us? Where within talk of a united Ireland, or even just as we go forward? And I've heard various interpretations of what we saw in the dressing room. Like, I've definitely heard very strongly, and it's even in the papers today, the suggestion that, like, this is just total ignorance. This is like, this tune's a banger, and up the ra, it's almost like it's like an umbrella term for Up Ireland. and so that's been put out there. They're too young. They don't remember. They're ignorant of history. And then others have said, well, it means something different to the younger generation. The IRA means something different to them.
I think it's probably a bit of all of that, Joe. I mean, we're talking about a big group of people whose experiences and backgrounds are all very different. So just listening to you say that's what comes to my mind. You have people from different families, different areas, different backgrounds, some from different countries.
Yeah.
And they are removed from the Troubles and everything else, but some would be clued into the Troubles. Some would have had the Troubles clued into them, or the political situation. And for others, it is a banger of a tune.
Yeah.
I think it's everything.
Yeah.
So maybe this is the media and us in general trying to take this one lesson out of something that is just... It's a collection of stars, you know. It's not one little planet that you can look at and go, that's the answer. It's everything, you know. So, and that's why I think there's so many different views on it. You can have somebody saying, no, they're all just young footballers who are leading closeted lives, and somebody saying, this is a reflection of where we are in modern Ireland. I mean, they're literally poles apart. But if you maybe sat down two of them over a cup of coffee, you might get both of those opinions.
It's funny, Kenny Cunningham was in here during the week, and we were just talking generally about this whole situation. I was chatting to him about the apology, and he said, oh, look, about halfway through my career, because he was captain at quite a few clubs, he was like, I stopped apologising on behalf of the dressing room for anything, because the dressing room does not think as one. And that applies to this. I think you're right, there's probably some in that dressing room who are of a strong political persuasion, reared in it, very aware of it, and when they sing Up the Ra, they mean it.
It means something to them.
Yeah, big time. And then there's those going along with the crowd and some in between. And it's this notion that, like, for the young generation it means something different. I read that in a few places during the week. I'm not sure I agree that that's a legitimate kind of stance for them to take. Like, I think if you're singing Up the Ra, that means up the provisional IRA. I don't see how that can't refer to the IRA.
It does, but they haven't lived that experience. Even for us down in the sheltered southern part of the island, and I think we're all of an age where we can remember the TV images on UTV, BBC, all the atrocities and everything. It means something different to us because we saw that. It was coming into our houses on an evening basis. They have never had that. I'm not saying that's right that they can have that, but you have to accept that different people have different contexts. And if you live something is, or if something is lived through your TV in real time, that's going to mean something different to somebody who wasn't born for another 10 years after the Troubles.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's the truth and that's the reality. But I just question whether somebody can say, it means something different to me because I'm choosing for it to. I'm going to wipe.
It means they're not listening to it. Like, even to people. Do you know what I mean? You know, some people mightn't feel strongly about it because of what you said, but there are people now who are listening about it, who do care about it, and you go from. It's also interesting that, you know, you could be saying to yourselves, you could be very I'm not saying this is the case in this situation, but, you know, when you go from being kind of get like going from not in the limelight to in the limelight, right? You've got people who are instantly aware of themselves and how important they are, and you've people who never really fully. They've driven humility their whole lives that they never actually realise that someone is going to actually care that much about what I say. That many people are going to actually listen to me. And I think there's definitely an element of that this week where you have both the song shouldn't be said, but B, the width that it was transmitted to in the end was not something that was aware. You
Tommy
know?
Martin had a piece during the week about how the age of innocence is over for this team now. They've crossed the line into...
But I think it happens with individuals. Like I know, I know people sometimes, you know, and you they're just so down to earth and humble, and they just do not understand the reach they have when they say something, and you're thinking, oh God, like that's going to hit everywhere in every home, you know, and it's great to just being yourself, but you know, it's an awareness that not everyone has.
I know for sure, and I think one of the things everybody agreed on is that in that moment of celebration in that dressing room, that the notion that they would have wanted to cause offence to anybody. I don't think anybody has that interpretation of events. You know, that they were thinking of victims of IRA atrocities in the past. You know,
and it's a shame that it is this team. I mean, they've been so open and so engaging, and again, going forward to the World Cup and everything, I hope it doesn't change how they
Might do.
I think it will, but I hope
he is willing to go on Sky Sports News as quickly. There'll be a
yeah.
standoffishness potentially.
But I mean, and that's it'd be a shame if it was, because their stories are so good, and it's the engagement. It's like you were talking about. I don't think they realise in a way. They talk about being doing this for girls and young boys in Ireland and everything, but at the same time, I think it's what you're talking about with humility, that they don't maybe understand that this is the scope for it. And I just hope they just continue to engage publicly in some shape or form in the way they have up to now,
Yeah.
I'll finish on this point. Just when I kind of took away the credit from the media, actually being moving on and being positive, right? That's probably not fair, right? There's two sides to it. The players have to, and the coach have to come out and deal with the problem they've caused, which I think they've done.
Yeah.
And I do think the media has actually played their part. There's many times, both watching World Cups and being in them, where I've been reading our media thinking, would they not just take a leaf out of someone else's book, where you'll notice in some World Cups where a national media has literally just backed their team a little bit, and there is room for it. There is place for it. If you want great things to happen, sometimes you kind of have to be, okay, let's go with the positive here. And I think there's been reading the paper today, I think the players did a great job responding to their mistake during the week. And I think, in fairness to the media, they have moved on. The country wanted them to move on, I think.
Yeah,
and I think they've
so.
reflected that.
Because it has been such an interesting week for all the conversation happening. Did you see Patrick Keelty pop up on your social media feed at all? So he was speaking at some conference relatively recently, I think, before this maybe had happened. And Patrick Keelty's father, Jack, I don't know if you know, was murdered by loyalist paramilitaries when he was 44 and Patrick Keelty was 16. And he was making all these really interesting points. I mean, further to what you were saying, Brendan, he was saying, it's easy to sit in a Dublin pub and say, the British government don't care about the North, when the truth is, does the Dublin pub care about the North all that much either? But it was the line which went viral, again, he said this before Tuesday or night. He said, the quote is, ghosts of the past are easy to honour. He said, it's way easier to sing a rebel song about a united Ireland than decide not to sing it in order to maybe have one. Which was a hell of a line.
That's
good,
you
can sing it if you want, but maybe we're better off not singing it. I thought it was a great way of putting it. So that's the Republic of Ireland coverage. There was a line in James Ducker piece. So there's lots of build up to Man City against Liverpool. Lots of people listen to this on podcast on a Monday, so they'll know the result by now. But you just took a screen grab on in our little WhatsApp group this morning of a quote from Pep Guardiola around the Liverpool City game last year, and you just said, I love this.
Yeah, so he says it was goalless at half-time of the match, right? So, and the game was on in Anfield, I think, was it? It was goalless half-time.
Yeah.
So they needed to win, right? And for me, this quote, I'll talk through why afterwards, but he said, I know guys in this stadium, especially in this one, the guys who want the ball and the guys who don't want the ball. I will take note, the strategies, the plan, follow them, convinced. And for me, this is kind of what I it kind of matches up with what my experience would be around high performance. There's nothing there about, we're away from home, we need to believe, it's a different message. He's got internal competition with his squad, which he's feeding off. He's actually saying to them, some of you in this room, will step up. But stepping up is a different term, right? Stepping up is what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Stepping up could mean to you, I'm going to run around and dive into everybody and you get a red card. Yeah. But to give it a real meaning, I just want you to want the ball, right? I think so. It's a clear message, and it also shows, he's saying as well, I'm the boss. I'll take note. There's a game coming next week. We're probably going to be playing in a final soon. All these things the players know in the background, and to actually keep delivering for this team, all he's watching now is, am I showing for the ball? Do I still want the ball?
There's a chilling aspect to heading out for the second half and knowing that Pep is taking note of who wants the ball.
Yeah, but I think it's also a confidence in it, right? He hasn't, if you think about it, he's basically saying this is what's going to win us the game.
Yes.
Right?
It takes the pressure off them in a sense, and if you do what I've asked you to do, then that's all you can do.
Yeah. And I find it you kind of flip on a page and there's about Mbappe, and you've got Galtier coaching him, and he's trying to get Name Our Soul last summer, you know, and I just like the gap between what would appear in those two managers is just astronomical, right? Or, you know, we talked about Xhaka, we kind of WhatsApped a bit this morning, and like that's fascinating as well. You go from a player who's shouting up at a group of fans, you know,
FU,
totally finished, and all of a sudden, you know, you see him. I remember watching him play for Switzerland and like calling my kids and my wife, like, I was like, what are you? I'm like, watch this guy running around, like look how good he is, and you know, and how much he wanted to win. And then you watch him go. My father-in-law's an Arsenal fan, and my wife, so we go back, and it's like a different player at that time, and it's I'm fascinated by how you know Arteta has taken this player who's out of favour, doesn't like it, and he's now charging around, you know, desperately wanting to win. And the bit that really caught me with the Xhaka piece was that he, you know, he said the reason he ended up in front of the crowd shouting at them, you know, was because he wanted to win so badly that he was dealing with it all the wrong way. And like, if the players, if the fans knew that, they'd never want someone like that to leave.
Well, he did scream "F you" at them, so you know
he did. But my point is,
That's dealing with it the wrong way.
It's just like if you were ever going to be a manager of a team, you know, you need those players who you need to kind of find a way to get them to be, you know, good culture drivers. But trying to give someone that level of desire to win is much harder, you know.
Yes,
so
he has the raw ingredients, so you just need to shape them.
Yeah, and I thought like across the piece today, like there was like, you know, you've got Klopp, who's probably not getting the most out of Liverpool at the moment. You had Guardiola, who obviously is. You know, you'd the Mbappe situation, or Harry Kane is flying along. You know, it's just amazing how different managers are getting different amounts out of each player at the moment, or each team.
It's really interesting, that Guardiola quote. 37 words. You've 10, 15 minutes in a dressing room, and yet I always remember Anthony Daly talking about sitting down with Joe Schmidt and showing him his notes. Do you remember this story?
Yeah.
Like, you know, here's my notes of what I'm going to talk to at half time. There was a foods cap nearly full of everything the guys need to remember, and Joe said 3 points. 3 points.
I think he had 10 key messages. Something
like that. You know, I over-egged the pudding a little bit there, of course.
But he had 10 key, like...
Yeah, but Joe said...
Make it 3.
Make it 3. Do you know what I mean? And that sense of clarity, I mean, you must have seen coaches who've done it brilliantly and done it terribly throughout your career.
Yeah, and you only... like the
name
thing,
names.
The thing is, you when you name 10 things, right, everyone hears 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if you were to ask everybody coming out, what's the one thing you're going to work on, or you're going to... They'll all say something different, because you've given everyone something different. Whereas if you stick to 1 or 2, then normally the message is aligned, and then you get everyone doing the same thing, you know.
Does the message have to change over years or over a season? Like if it's a coach saying the same 1 or 2 things for a year, does everyone get sick though?
It depends, you know. It depends. If it's working, no.
Yes,
I mean, you watch Sean Edwards with France, you know, you think he's been saying the same thing for 20 years now. You know, finally other teams are doing what he's doing. It's just skill. Like some of the coaches just able to read that room, you know, and that Pep Guardiola quote was perfect, I think, you know.
Yeah. Xhaka, by the way, very interesting. You've alluded to the interview. It's basically with Rob Draper about how he's gone from FU to the fans to now. He's quite emotional because they have a new song for him in the last couple of weeks, and he's been brilliant, and he's kind of amazed that it's turned around. I think we're all a bit amazed the extent to which it's turned around, because even he said his dad, who's not a quitter, told him after that match it's time to leave in October 2019. And he talks at length about his father, who was in jail for 3.5 years in former Yugoslavia, protesting for the rights of ethnic Albanians in Kosovo in the late 80s, and he was stuck in a cell, and he was in a cell for 23 hours and 50 minutes a day with 4 other people. And amazingly as well, his parents met each other a week before he went to prison when they were 18, 19, and his mother waited for his father for 3.5 years, and it was 1990 when he was released, and they got the hell out of there and got to Switzerland, and that's why he's playing for Switzerland now. So kind of an amazing backstory. So he does make the point when my dad said it's time to leave. Like, well, my dad is not a quitter, so maybe I should get out of here. But he's there now and doing brilliantly.
This is in one way an even better interview than the Dylan Hartley one, which we all loved, in the sense that it's a current player. Do you know what I mean?
And a footballer,
and
they're
a
less
footballer, Premier
open,
League, top of the tree, and it's all predicated on the fact it's nearly 3 years, or more or less 3 years, since that day against Crystal Palace, when he hit the real low with Arsenal. And then, you know, having a backstory like that with his dad doesn't hurt either. And it's remarkable, because you hear guys around the soccer beat in the UK and even here, and trying to get access to these guys. There's all these stories there to be told as well, and you just never really hear about them. You might see them on Premier League review or preview or
Yeah.
whatever,
And it's like this anodyne quote here and there.
Yeah,
Do you know what I
yeah.
thought was interesting as well? It's like, it's funny, like we're talking about the complicated politics of Ireland there. Every country's got their own stuff going on.
That confused me, actually. I had to read it like 3 times.
Yeah.
Is he from A, B or C, and where's the dad from, and where did he end up? And
But it's interesting. So he's 106 caps for Switzerland.
Yeah.
And when there was talk of him being potentially made captain a while back, the former Liverpool player and Swiss international Stefan Henshaw said he shouldn't be in contention to be Switzerland captain because he doesn't represent Switzerland. So I mean,
Crazy.
all of this stuff
Isn't it?
going on, you know?
You know, and a very multicultural country, you know, with the 3, you know, French, German, Italian, even before you have the influx of immigrants into it. Like, you know, how many languages do they speak there? So, you know, it goes back to that, you know, what is identity anyway? And especially in a country with that, you know, influx of different influences, you know?
Yeah. And Stefan Henshaw's been in multicultural dressing rooms all his life.
Yeah,
He's
you know.
Oh no, he doesn't represent us.
Yeah, it's a terrible quote, isn't it?
Great. Yeah, I hadn't realised that was
I didn't. I'd never heard that before.
part of the debate around Jack.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
He's going to be at Qatar anyway, so we'll see him again. We are pretty much out of time, unless there's any final point anyone wants to make. Sambo
is good, yeah.
it's an extract from his book, isn't
Yes,
it?
yeah.
He just talks about, well, I guess it's funny, like the North has kind of been a theme all week. He's got a new book out, and there's an extract from it, page 19 of the Sunday Independent, and he's been an all-star winning hurler for Antrim and gone into management now, and his new book is out, and he just talks about coming home from Oma one night from a dinner dance, and he was stopped in the middle of nowhere by a man with his face painted black, 1 a.m. They're the only two on this country road, and rolls down window, and he just has license, gives him the license, and the guy walks around to the back of the car, and 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, half an hour goes by. He says, I couldn't see him or hear him. You don't sit in a situation like that for long without your mind starting to play games with you. This is obviously during the height of the Troubles, I should say. And there were no other cars, it was just me and him. Strange fear built up inside me. Tried to stay calm, but I was sweating, imagining all sorts of scenarios. I knew if I attempted to drive on, he would shoot me. Or even if he didn't, there could be a road block mounted further up the road. Took everything inside me not to give way to the rising panic. And so it was 3 a.m, just shy of 2 hours, when he said, there's your licence, and lets him drive on. And kind of frightening ordeal, as you can imagine. And he just talks about how routinely, if you were stopped and you had hurls in the back of the car, the soldiers would break them. And he said, when I was growing up, you could never carry hurls. A priest used to come around on a Friday night and gather them up, as he didn't want to make us targets coming home from training or matches. And talks about his eldest son, who was 3 or 4, when he went to visit my wife's family. There was a band marching. They began spitting at him because he had GAA gear on. So, I mean, we don't down here understand, like we try to understand, and we talk about the IRA there, and we talk about all aspects of it, and the lived experience is just so...
The lived experience. I'm just looking at it there, a chronology of the Troubles. So this is... he was picked in the 91 All-Stars team, so he's doing the winter dinner dance schedule going around.
Yeah, because there aren't many Ulster hurlers.
Yeah,
Ulsters,
exactly.
yeah.
So I'm trying to get a timeline on it. So maybe the end of 1991, and just looking at the chronology of the Troubles here, and, you know, where are we? 14th of November, 2 Catholic civilians and 1 Protestant civilian killed as they're travelling home from work by the UVF. And that feeds into what he's saying. I was sitting there for almost 2 hours trying to stay calm but sweating and imagining all sorts of scenarios. So this is the stuff that's on the news.
Yeah.
This is stuff that they're experiencing all around them. Imagine sitting in that car in the middle of nowhere up a mountain for 2 hours.
Because I think if we're stopped in that scenario, we kind of think, well, nothing too bad can happen here, really, in the real world. But for him, it was distinctly possible. And he talks about a delivery man delivering bread to the cafe next
Yeah.
door to where he worked, just
He
being
was-
shot at 7 in the
He
morning.
was working in Guinness one morning at 7. He heard this bang, which he knew was a gunshot, and looked around to see what was happening. The Mother's Pride bakery yard next to where I worked had only a steel partition between us. The killing had taken place about 20 yards from where I was, and the victim was a bread delivery man.
Yeah.
Like, it's, you know.
Now,
he's-
I don't know who committed that
No.
murder, but again, that's why, you know, to Patrick Keelty's point, like, people have like said openly on the radio this week, well, they just sang it because it was a banger of a tune.
Yeah.
And then if you're a victim and
It all goes back to Vera
come on.
Pauw's point. It was wrong, full stop. You know, shouldn't have happened.
Gents, thank you so much. That was great. Reddan O'Brien of the Irish Examiner, Eoin Reddan, thank you very much for coming to studio. Come again in the next 6 months or a year, drop in and do it. No comment, he says.
All right. For sure.
Back next week. Thanks a minute.